Alright, this is probably going to be the last piece of news that I have for the series until the Switch 2 reveal when we learn a little bit about the next game.
Yeah, okay, sure. Prove me wrong. Immediately. Thank you for at least waiting the requisite 24 hours so that people watched that video and weren't completely clowning on me the entire time. There were actual insightful comments before everyone just started memeing and telling me to make this video. Anyway, here is this video. We have, in the year of our Lord 2025, Xenoblade Chronicles X getting an enhanced port to the Switch 1. Now, this isn't entirely unprecedented. It's not like people haven't been asking for this for years. And it's not like we didn't expect there to be some sort of new Monolith game in 2025. I was even calling enhanced re-release and not new game. I just thought it was going to be Xenosaga, and, well, obviously, for the new console that everyone's assuming is going to release in 2025 at some point, and not the one that we've been working with for so long. Am I kind of disappointed that X is only getting the 1 generational improvement when Xenoblade 1 got the 2 generational jump? I guess, but also I do think it's very worthwhile that there is a version of X playable on the original Switch, so that even if the Switch 2 does somehow bomb the same way the Wii U did, X will be on a widely available platform, and anyone who wants to play it easily can. Also, I would be very surprised if this and then also Xenoblade 2 and 3 do not get enhancement patches for the new hardware eventually. Oh, right. This video will not contain spoilers until I talk about the new scene at the end of the trailer. Until then, no spoilers for any game. I'll give a bigger spoiler warning then. While I am going to go through the trailer shot by shot and analyze everything like I usually do, I don't think that is going to be the majority of this video, because while that's all very cool and the visuals look amazing, as they always do in new Monolith games, ultimately, the majority of the visuals in the trailer are just a few cutscenes from the very beginning of the game, so that kind of thing would better be explored through a graphics comparison between the two versions of the game, which there are other channels that are not me where you could probably get a better thing from, so I'm not even going to bother trying to do that. I can talk about other aspects of this though. The first thing is the release date, March 20th, 2025. I'm not going to bother commenting on what this means for the Switch 2's launch window or even reveal window anymore, but I will say that this is very close to exactly 10 years after the original Xenoblade X launched, which was April 29th, 2015. This is somewhat similar to what was done with Xenoblade 1, as the original version of that game released June 10th, 2010 in Japan, and its definitive edition was May 29th, 2020 worldwide. The difference is that when Xenoblade 1 DE was first revealed, it was explicitly stated that this was done in part for the series' 10th anniversary, but with X, it's just, yeah, we're bringing Xenoblade X back, with no mention of the anniversary whatsoever, so it is possible that there is some ulterior motive beyond just putting it on a more recent system and celebrating its anniversary. So extrapolating this to Xenoblade 2 Definitive Edition in 2027, especially if the Switch 2 is backwards compatible and can play the original version of the game, is not really worth trying at this point. As for the trailer itself, the only music we hear playing during it is Theme X, a cutscene theme exactly the same as it was in the original game, and one of the main cutscenes that is in this trailer, the one of Elma introducing NLA to the protagonist for the first time, is a scene where it plays in the original, so there's a good chance we won't have part of the OST remastered like was done with Xenoblade 1. The good thing is that the music is just actually back in general, as this game was composed by Hiroyuki Sawano, unlike every other game in the series, and his licensing was a lot jankier to the point where the OST for Xenoblade X, a Nintendo game, is owned by Sony, so I'm glad that they were able to work through whatever deals needed to be done in order to bring it back for this version of the game and didn't just recompose everything, because while it is certainly different, and a lot of people dislike it because it is different, it is also different in a way that fits how different X is from the entire rest of the series. Voice-wise, these are the same lines and the same takes used in the original game. I saw some rumblings about, oh, maybe they're going to redub the original game or do some sort of relocalization. These are definitely different takes. I can 100% confirm both Elma and Lynn, in both languages the game is dubbed in, are using the original takes from the original game. So the base story, anything that has not been changed, is almost certainly going to be handled exactly how it was in Xenoblade 1 DE, and that is, it will be the exact same scenes from the original game, just with the updated visuals. Elma's English VA, Caitlin Glass, has already commented on the reveal, saying something to the effect of, "It's good to be back after 10 years, and that also shouldn't really be a surprise. She's been active in the VA industry, both behind the mic and as a director the entire time, reprised Elma back in 2018 for Xenoblade 2's DLC, and the way things around the new story content are worded this time suggests that it is an expansion to the base game as opposed to a separate campaign, which would almost necessitate new Elma dialogue, so it is almost certain she's recording new things, we just haven't heard any of them yet. Do I think that a couple terms in the localization probably should be changed, especially if this new story content focuses on them? Yes, and in that case, they can just re-record those lines specifically, but overall there isn't really a need to completely redo the entire localization. Though I will say, one of the new Definitive Edition quality of life upgrades should be an option to change the voice language independent of the text language of the game, as that really is an industry standard in the current day, was not present in the original Xenoblade X, and the games were region locked, so you couldn't just even buy a Japanese version to play it on your Western system to hear the Japanese voices, and fans of the series were so vocal about it in the lead up to the Xenoblade 2 release that there was a day one patch including a voice toggle, and also, like, hey, maybe Japanese-speaking fans might want to hear the English voices for a change too. This doesn't just go one way here. One thing I can say for certain is that the audio mixing in the trailer is significantly better than it was in the original game. Just comparing a couple shots here, while the positioning of the song is different because one is the cutscene from the game and the other was mixed especially for the trailer, you can barely hear Elma in the original.
We call it New Los Angeles. Welcome to NLA. We call it New Los Angeles. Welcome to NLA.
And so it was that another survivor came to join our band of refugees. And so it was that another survivor came to join our band of refugees.
So, it's my hope that another one of the improvements is to the audio mixing. This has been one of the weakest aspects of the series in terms of presentation for its entire existence, so I would hope that they continue to improve with it, and if not improve it at the base level in X Definitive Edition, at the very least, I hope some of the new quality of life features are more granular toggles to adjust the volume of things in the settings, so if by default it does still sound like it did in the original, at least the player can fix it after a couple scenes and some tweaking. On a somewhat related topic, I am pretty hopeful we're going to get an event theater this time that was not present in the original game but has been a series staple since Xenoblade 2, including Xenoblade 1 being given one in its Definitive Edition. You might think they would run into issues because of how gearing in X works and the fact that the character is a customized player character. However, I have a feeling they're going to do something somewhat disappointing. Xenoblade 1 had 3 save file slots to begin with. Xenoblade 2 only had 1. 1's Definitive Edition only had the same 3 slots the original game did, plus an autosave. The original Xenoblade X was also only 1 save per user profile on the console, and it's pretty likely they're going to keep that exact structure the same in this Definitive Edition, especially since the online features are intact, so keeping it to 1 character per profile is probably what they're going to do. Gearing-wise, Xenoblade 1 DE added something virtually identical to Xenoblade X's fashion gear system into that game, and you could fully customize the outfits of every playable character on a cutscene by cutscene basis, and they'd almost certainly just do that, where you could only pull from gear that you have unlocked as fashion gear options in the file you're doing the cutscene thing based off of. Now, the one big difference that Xenoblade 1 DE had over X is that in order to unlock a piece of gear as an option for fashion gear, all that needed to happen was that gear to touch your inventory once. Then you could get rid of it and it would be permanently unlocked in the list. In X, it only takes from gear you still have in your inventory, so if you like the look of a piece of gear, you're going to need to keep it around and can't just sell it even if it's no longer useful stat-wise. I do hope this does get updated to follow the 1DE system. I really don't see any reason why it wouldn't, in addition to allowing us to change the skin of weapons, which was not possible in X but was in 1DE. And I do also kind of want them to add some sort of gear dyeing system. While a lot of actual armor is just recolors of it, and that's the same in Xenoblade 1 and basically every JRPG with customizable equipment that shows up on your character, there's also a lot of casual gear in the game that doesn't provide any meaningful stat benefits, and exists just so you can put a more casual outfit on your character. Side quest rewards in the original game include the exact same t-shirt in like 6 or 7 colors, the exact same dress outfit in like 3 or 4 colors, 2 versions of the Blade dress uniform, a tank top in the exact same 6 or 7 colors as the t-shirt, and then 3 camo colors as well, all as completely separate items you needed to individually keep in your inventory in order to dress up with. If they condensed all of those into one piece each, and then also made that dyeable, I think that would be a very massive improvement. While X's inventory caps are massive and you're not exactly going to fill yours up while just going through the game casually, it's really annoying to scroll through when you're trying to gear characters as well, because you have to wade your way through all of this completely useless stat-wise fashion equipment just to get to the one actual good piece that you want to put on. And then you also have to scroll through 6 copies of the exact same thing to get to the fashion piece you want. It's probably wishful thinking to ask for the ability to dye just regular armor pieces that have multiple recolors as different stat tiers already, but given how robust the Skell dyeing system is in the original game, it's not impossible, so I would kind of like that to happen. Another very easy thing that could be added are new character customization options, because honestly, the character creator in the original isn't the greatest thing in the world. By Nintendo standards, it's incredible, but it's fairly restrictive, especially since X is very clearly trying to be more like an MMO than the original game. And most modern MMOs that aren't Final Fantasy XIV have significantly more robust character creators than X does, so this would be a good opportunity to greatly expand on the options, let more people be able to create a character that actually looks like them, and, of course, increase the amount of really goofy things we can do with it, because that's pretty important as well. Bring the boob slider back while also completely reworking Lynn's versions of certain outfits so that they're modeled from scratch to look different and proper for her instead of just the regular version with extra black texture slapped over it, and add more character customization options and more voice options, like, say, some cameos from Xenoblade 2 and 3 to go with the Xenoblade 1 cameos in the original game, and we could be seeing the best iteration of this kind of thing that's ever been in a Nintendo game. It's also extremely likely we're going to get a few new pieces of gear, because in Xenoblade 1 DE, every party member got 2 new outfits, plus Shulk and Melia's new ones for Future Connected, and since every character can wear almost every piece of gear in the game in X, we're probably just going to get several new generic outfits. I also wouldn't be surprised if the 5 current Xenoblade-related amiibo also got some sort of special outfits or weapon skins, and honestly, I would be really happy if we got Skell frames based on mechs from other games in the series that were locked behind amiibo, or most likely based on Xenoblade 3's amiibo stuff, also achievable in-game through some sort of challenge or online stuff. Speaking of that online stuff, it has already been confirmed to be back, which is pretty neat because this definitive edition is releasing a bit under a year after the Wii U servers went down, so there will be only a very short period of time, all things considered, where you could not play Xenoblade X online. Not only does the official site reference up to 32 players online, but the blurb for the page directly name-drops squad tasks, online missions, and nemesis battles, in addition to saying that this game will come with a 14J NSO free trial, so at the very least we're getting the exact online package that we got back in 2015, and I would not be surprised if more content is added eventually. There aren't really that many missions, all things considered. They could fairly easily tweak the random algorithm for squad tasks to give more complex permutations of things, and I would be very surprised if we don't get at least a 3rd global nemesis in this game. We can also see that the projected file size is 15 gigs, which is kind of crazy because, first thing, the download version of the original game was 20 gigs, and the data packs you could get for the physical version to improve load times were 10 gigs. So we're right smack in the middle of those. Now, I highly doubt that they would do something like the data packs again, because that was really weird, and after the Wii U eShop went down, you just could not get the best version of the game unless you already had it. But also, the Definitive Edition textures look significantly better in the original game, so the smaller file size, I'm going to assume, is because they have access to better compression techniques that they did not have back in 2015, because I highly doubt they took anything out of the game. I think I've run out of things to talk about without directly addressing the trailer, so we're going to do that and just kind of stop for very long periods of time during it to discuss other things as we get to them. The first thing we see is from the cutscene I mentioned before, the one where you make it to NLA for the first time, Elma introduces you to the city, and then you zoom out and get all those cool shots of it, which then bleeds into Lynn's narration and the title drop. Just like in Xenoblade 1, the general level design and geometry is identical to the original game, as are the animations, cinematography, and even sound effects, but just looking at the ground in the first shot here, we can see how much better the textures and lighting are. My footage is going to be at a completely different time of day in every cutscene, so there's not going to be a lot of good comparisons, especially since this is technically a download of a YouTube mirror and not the original raw capture card footage. But rest assured, everything has gotten a new coat of paint to the same degree as things in Xenoblade DE, if not more. Again, even compared to Xenoblade 1, which went through 2 generations of improvements versus 1 generation this time, it kind of feels like going through the Dawn Trail graphics update for a second time, where people have opinions on the faces, but materials and especially character clothing looks so much better than it did before, and the lighting improvements are really impressive. I will say there are what appear to be a few frame drops in this trailer, but the game is 5 months out. I'm not going to be too worried about that until I see it actually happening in the final product. I would hope that this game runs in as stable a 30 frames per second as the original did, and I sincerely hope it is in a higher resolution as well, as simply being in 1080 or even 900p versus the 720 of the original game would make even the same size UI much more readable, though I do hope that one of the tweaks is, if not a strictly bigger and more readable UI, an option to change it to make it so. This is especially necessary because this game should be playable in handheld, and if it's like some of the other Xenoblade games on Switch, dynamic resolution will put it below the resolution of the original, which means the UI has to be even more readable to make sure you can understand everything in that state. At the very least, increase the size of the subtitles, please. During this shot, the Monolith Soft logo fades in, and that should not be a surprise to anyone on this channel anymore. However, I think it's worth pointing out now that this is a definitive edition of X. In fact, if you look at the logo, it is the exact same definitive edition text that was used in the logo for Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition, and if the additional story content wasn't enough to give it away, this means that like that game, it is being developed in-house by Monolith Soft and is not going to be just a simple port job by some other studio. This is cool because it means the quality of the porting, and obviously from everything we've seen so far, the quality of the new visuals are going to be great, but I do think we need to temper our expectations because it's not just called the same thing as the Xenoblade 1-1, but it has the exact same style logo as the Xenoblade 1-1. If you were around back in 2019-2020, you will remember the ways people were hyping up Xenoblade 1 Definitive Edition and talking about potential additions to it, when it turns out that there were very little actual changes to the game. It got new quality of life, but in terms of new content, it was just challenge mode and future connected. So I don't want to talk about that many potential things and get everyone's hopes up for a bunch new content, in case, just like that game, this just does end up being X with a new coat of paint, some new challenge missions, and an epilogue. On the other hand, though, back in 2018, during an interview about Xenoblade 2 primarily, series executive director Tetsuya Takahashi was asked about porting X to Switch, and he said that it's unlikely to happen because, and I quote, money. It's a massive game. Recreating it would be really difficult. This suggests that he would not be satisfied with a simple direct port to Switch, and would want to change things up, possibly to get a bit closer to the original vision for the game that had to be stripped down a lot because of the online functions and time constraints. But then also, in the same interview, Takahashi is quoted as saying, well, the future at present is unclear, with the writer of the article stating that he gave the same answer when asked about a Xenoblade 3, and obviously Xenoblade 3 happened a few years after that. But then the epilogue of Xenoblade DE is connected to Xenoblade 3 in a very specific way. And you need to make Xenoblade X1 accessible in order to make a Xenoblade X2, or some other future Xenoblade game including canon content related to X. So what's the new content there going to be? 1 didn't really have its vision compromised other than on a technical level by the limitations of the Wii. The story they wanted to tell got told, and it doesn't really seem like there was anything gameplay-wise that they wanted to implement for that game that they never got to. That then raises the question, what is their goal with the new content in this game? Is it going to just quickly wrap up the unanswered questions? Is it going to be tying it into the rest of the series? Or is it going to be something like Future Connected? A small additional campaign providing hints at the future of things, but primarily leaving answers for a proper Xenoblade X2 that actually finishes the story they wanted to tell, and includes next generation online enhancements, gameplay things, and is able to realize the scale and scope of what they originally wanted to do. The correct answer to this is we don't know, but when I get into the spoiler section of this video, I will still voice my opinions, at least based on what we know so far. Elma begins to step into the light, and while her outfit was appropriately metallic in the Wii U version, you can clearly see that they improved the lighting and the way different materials interact with light. In some ways, this does look more impressive than certain aspects of Xenoblade 3 did, despite the underlying models seemingly being taken directly from the Wii U version. So this is good not just for this game, but for their future titles, which are likely to include the best of both worlds from 3 and this game, as well as just be better from the ground up because they're developed for more powerful hardware. What follows is a montage of shots of the city, and again, with no direct time match, I can't compare this well enough to the original game to see exactly what's improved, but looking at the cat especially, that is the exact same cat model as the original game, just enhanced. Overall, there are texture improvements, there are materials improvements, there are lighting improvements. The color grading in the entire game appears to be a bit different, similar to how Xenoblade 1 was changed from the original. In this case, things are primarily just changed to be a bit more saturated and vibrant looking, but overall the color palette I would think is a bit closer to the Wii U Xenoblade X compared to the change between the versions of Xenoblade 1. Most importantly though, we get to see Elma's face, and this might as well be a third new design for her. Compared to the other games, the way Xenoblade X works is that all playable characters are built on the same rig as the protagonist, and all of their animations are identical outside of cutscenes. Plus, the fact that everyone can wear the same gear means that their bodies are effectively just custom sliders on the character creator. This means that they don't need to update every single important character's model independently. They just need to update the base used for player characters, and then the gear and the scaling that they have in place just as part of the way the game works will account for the rest. That being said, there are a lot more unique gear models in this game compared to Xenoblade 1, and we know that game's definitive edition improved more assets than were originally intended. So while the textures are improved, we're not likely to see many new polygons added to outfits that are at least originating from the Wii U version. New outfits will probably look better by default. It appears that the polygon count, even of the default protagonist outfit and Elma's default outfit, is the same as the original game, so I'm not anticipating anything super huge beyond what Xenoblade 1 did on that front. That being said, this means that the primary thing that's actually unique to each character is their face sculpt, because that is the one thing that's not shared with the player character template. And as we can see, Elma's does look significantly more detailed than the one in the original game. Pretty different. The real point of me bringing up all that stuff about models from before is to say that Elma here, from the neck down, is for all intents and purposes just a somewhat touched up version of her model from the original Wii U version, but her head appears to just be completely original to DE. In fact, Elma's Xenoblade 2 model is basically that as well. From the neck down, it's just an edited version of her Xenoblade X1 to bring the textures more in line with the color palette and lighting of Xenoblade 2, then the face is a completely new sculpt based on her brand new design for that game. The thing about that is, Xenoblade X's character designer and the designer of the Xenoblade 2 version of Elma was the same person, Kunihiko Tanaka, who is confirmed to have left the Xeno series after all of his work on Xenoblade 2 and its DLC, which means this new Elma does not really seem to match his art style much. On top of that, Xenoblade 2 and 3 character designer Masasugu Saito has already confirmed he is not involved in this project. Somewhat relatedly, Yuichiro Takeda, a scenario writer for every game in the Xenoblade series, said something after the reveal implying he did know about this project and just didn't expect it to be announced now, so very unsurprisingly, he's almost certainly involved in writing any of the new story content. The shape of her face looks completely different. Her eyes are a lot sharper than they were before, when bigger, more rounded eyes are a hallmark of Tanaka's style. And while her hair is a lot closer to how it was in the Wii U version of X, it is significantly different from that as well. I am going to kind of miss her extremely fluffy hair from Xenoblade 2, but given how they didn't really bring X that much closer to the numbered game style and are keeping it a little bit more grounded and realistic looking in terms of character design, this does probably make a bit more sense. Another thing to mention is that when Xenoblade 1 DE was made, the character faces were also completely redone and actually look significantly more different than their original versions compared to this game, and they also were completely reanimated for every cutscene in the game, and cross-referencing Elma here and in the original, that does not seem to be the case. We don't really know for sure if Elma's skeleton has exactly as many movable points on it in this game as compared to the original, but they're only moving the same amount of things that were moving in the original version of the cutscene. So even if it is a more detailed and expressive looking face, she's still making the exact same movements down to the lip syncing as with the original. So they might not have reanimated as many cutscenes in this game as they did for Xenoblade 1. While overall the faces do look amazing, that does raise the one concern. People's complaints about the faces in the Wii U version of X were not just that they looked uncanny and plasticky, but that they also weren't animated. They weren't really animated even as much as the original Xenoblade 1, let alone that's DE. So while any new cutscenes will be animated to the standards of Xenoblade 2 and 3, the old ones might still only look like they did on the Wii U, which does kinda suck. Arguably, they could even look worse, because while the old models get tons of flack, at least the cutscenes were animated around what those looked like, and these are so much different. Now, obviously, there aren't that many bespoke animated cutscenes in Xenoblade X compared to the other games. There are so many scenes that are just all relevant characters standing around in a circle, talking, using generic animations that are so zoomed out you can't see what they're doing anyway. And most side quest stuff is just done with certain canned animations and no voice acting, so there's not any hand-drawn lip syncing either, so maybe they didn't think it was necessary since there was just less content that would be affected by it, but I don't know. It is kind of unfortunate that they're not going all the way with that like they did for Xenoblade 1. I'm also going to say the same thing a lot of people have been. This Elma looks more like Alvis than any previous one. I initially assumed that, yeah, Elma and Alvis, their designs were both based on Xenosaga characters. Alvis is clearly supposed to be an older-looking Chaos. But I was always under the impression that Elma's design was supposed to be based on Telos. Honestly, that might still be true. Elma's eye color still matches Telos a lot more than Chaos, and both the general shape of her face and nose also now more resemble what Telos looked like in Xenosaga 3. Though, unfortunately, it's kind of hard to compare their skin tones, both Elma's in the original and in DE compared to Xenosaga, just purely because Telos is never really in places that are lit as well as Elma is in this trailer. So that's not really a good comparison point, especially because Saga 3 has extremely old lighting compared to even the Wii U version of X. But something still made me think Alvis. I don't know, it might just be the bangs. But either way, she screams Alvis more than Telos to me for the first time since I knew Xenosaga was a thing, and I guess that's important to point out. I would absolutely love to see this face be animated and have such subtle movements like the way eyes are in Xenoblade 3, but it really does seem like we might only see that in the new content. I don't know, Future Connected's cutscenes had significantly higher production value than almost everything in base Xenoblade 1, so there's probably not a lot to worry about. We're still gonna see them look that good. What we next see, though, is Default Male Cross, and he looks way more different than Elma did. Hair is completely different, and while it's way more detailed, it got less volume, and the ahoge is gone. That's horrible. I don't know, I'm not actually mad about that. The way the model looks now really suggests more customization options, so I'm 100% okay with stuff like that happening, especially if a little bit more ridiculous things are still available as options. And really, it's kind of funny how we've gone from when X was first announced, Xenoblade 1 fans complaining about how it looks so much more cartoony and bad compared to the models in that game, they're doing the same for 2, to now Xenoblade X 100% just having the most grounded art style and color palette, and probably also the most realistic looking designs, even though especially Elma's head does seem to be a bit bigger than it was in the original game, which would be less realistic proportionally, but the eyes are also smaller, and just the body proportions are really realistic, even compared to the humanoid characters of Xenoblade 3, so we've gone through the full inversion, I guess, I don't know. The next few shots are just from the cutscene that plays when you first step out into Primordia from the valley in which you start the game, and again, there's not really much that can be said here. They look beautiful, but they look beautiful because they did back in 2015 in the original game. The lighting is improved, but the one shot that I really wanted to see the new lighting for, which is where the clouds break and you start to see the sunlight drift through from the beginning, is not present in this trailer. So we're gonna have to wait to get really wowed by this. It's also just kind of generically day, so we're not gonna see what the skybox looks like in other weather or other times of day quite yet, which is also something I'm very excited for because I think the original Xenoblade X has my favorite skyboxes in all of gaming, and I have really, really high hopes for the ones in this remaster. Next shot is of Cross, Elma, and Lynn running through Primordia. We can tell that this is very, very early in the game because Tatsu is nowhere on screen, and he will be shown later, so it's not like he's been removed from the game. Cross is wearing a different outfit, but he's the furthest one from the camera, and moving, so it's very hard to see what that looks like. Oh, also, while I could recreate all these running around shots in-game, I don't have the time to do that. You probably want to see this video sooner than later. Next up is the same group running through Noctilum. It looks like everyone has the same outfit, but they're in the dark portion and moving, and it's a YouTube compression, so I can't quite tell exactly what they look like. It's night in Noctilum. These like two plants we can already see look great. I believe this is the entrance to the continent, which means we've yet to see the most gorgeous parts of this game yet in the definitive edition lighting, which means we're going to be blown away completely by a future trailer that shows off this and Sylvalum at night. Speaking of Sylvalum, while we can't see it anywhere in the trailer, the next shot is a Skell in vehicle mode, driving south on the archipelago, connecting it to Primordia, and you can see Oblivia off in the distance. It does not look like the draw distance has been significantly improved, as those are things that you could see from there in the original game, but there is no pop-in in this or any clip, which in and of itself is a major improvement to the graphics of this game. So if they manage to pull that off, that already is something spectacular, especially if the load times are also faster than they used to be. The Skell transforms and takes flight, and then we cut to Oblivia, where the same Skell is flying, firing up the turbo, heading through the Oblivia Ring. In this case, we're looking southeast towards Great Washington Isle. Also, the Skell in these clips is designed to look exactly like the one from the initial Xenoblade X reveal trailer before it even had the Xenoblade name and was just known as Monolith Soft's mysterious Wii U game Project X. Once again, everything looked completely sturdy as we cut again to sprinting across Lake Ciel in Sylvalum. In the distance, we can finally see a little bit of UI. While random collectibles do appear to just not be present in this build for trailer purposes, we can see a treasure in the distance, and the yellow pop-up highlighting that it is something you can interact with and potentially get a treasure using a field skill is actually there. Cross-referencing with the shape of the container, the location on the lake, and the enemies around, I believe what we're looking at is this specific archaeological level 2 alien reliquary, which doesn't even count for a segment, but hey, it's the first treasure we get to see in Xenoblade X Definitive Edition, so that's gotta count for something. Speaking of gameplay, a few miscellaneous quality of life things that probably should be added. First off is the obvious exact same experience point system as Xenoblade 1 DE had, and then also extend this so that characters who are outside your active party can gain bonus experience and regular experience as well, because it was really annoying to have to switch out party members and then catch those up to the rest of your party if you wanted to actually use them in some upcoming thing where they'd have to be fighting enemies that would be overleveled for them, and then you end up getting yourself overleveled, and there's no way to decrease your level at all in X. Just put all of that together, make it exactly how it worked in Xenoblade 1 DE, or Xenoblade 2 in New Game Plus, or Xenoblade 3 in the post-game, and there you go. Also, make it so that you don't need to physically visit a party member in New Los Angeles in order to add them to your party. Let you open the party members menu, and just switch out the characters you have with you with everyone else you've unlocked, like a normal JRPG. If you want to limit being able to do that to only while you're in NLA for balancing purposes or whatever, go ahead, but do you have any idea how annoying it is to properly gear up more than 3 non-cross characters? Because you'd have to go walking around or skip traveling around the city just to check what someone else has equipped? Is pretty awful, so being able to just scroll down a menu and just look at what everyone has at the same time is so much better. You can already somewhat do this in the Skell assignment menu. You can assign Skells to characters not in your current party, and that Skell will just automatically join your party when that character does, so just extend it to the human characters as well, please. Also, very obviously, modernize the quest tracking and documentation to make it equivalent to Xenoblade 1 DE or Xenoblade 3. Not much else to say here. Base X's quest tracking was very similar to the original version of Xenoblade 1, and since that got upgraded, this should be as well. The follow ball originated in this game and effectively returned as a marker on the minimap in Xenoblade 3, so on that front, there's not really any additional quality of life that really needs to be added. In the existing compendiums of the Bestiary and Collectopedia, though, I do think that they should add a minimap of the continent that creature or item is found on, with a little hotspot highlighted showing where you can commonly find that, because there are a lot of very obscure things that you need for quests because of how big the game is, and that's a very similar form of quality of life to the being able to buy difficult to find collectibles that were added for Xenoblade 1. Additionally, there should either be some sort of lookup for generic items you've gotten, or an additional tab in the enemy index showing what specific materials enemies drop to make looking up that stuff easier in-game as well. They should also probably improve the in-game tutorials. Most of the good teaching you how to play Xenoblade X exists only in the digital manual of the Wii U version, and there's not even an option for Switch games to access something like this unless downloading the game or installing it gives you access to an entirely different thing on the Switch homepage, or they give you like a QR code with tutorials in that. So I think it would be a good idea to heavily improve the in-game tutorials instead of relying on an extra step that not a lot of people who played the original game used. Also, add the Xenoblade 2 and 3 unique monster tombstone to the tyrants in this game. They did not do it for Xenoblade 1 for some reason, despite that releasing long after 2 and Torna, which both had it. And since then, we've also had 3 in Future Redeemed, which included it, and a version in 3 that also allowed you to re-challenge more difficult versions of super bosses, so hey, put both of those things in X, there is zero excuse not to. I never really found them as egregious as the Xenoblade 1 ones, but I would not mind if the menus in this game were a bit touched up as well. Unfortunately, when updating Xenoblade 1's menus, they got rid of all the charm and unique area stuff that were present in those games for a very flat, modern corporate look, but given how Xenoblade X's already look, I think it would probably be okay to keep that aesthetic and just make it flow better as opposed to completely changing it from the ground up, because the way you interacted with the menu as a whole in the original Xenoblade 1 is different from its definitive edition. Speaking of changing platforms again, how are we going to do the touchscreen stuff in this game? It's not really that difficult. As long as in handheld, it plays the same as playing the original X on the gamepad, so you can still use the touchscreen for that stuff, I can't really see them doing this wrong. All you need is a button to bring up the map, and you can bring up the map on the one screen that you have for the Switch. The gamepad was never a limitation when it came to porting Xenoblade X. It was always a cost thing. The menus don't really need to be improved, but the combat UI definitely does. And considering they completely revamped Xenoblade 1's to make it more readable when that didn't really have many issues in that front in the original, I think they're going to be okay this time. While later Xenoblade games are still very busy, Xenoblade 3 is also one of the most readable UIs in the series, so I can't see them backtracking from there. Oh yeah, hopefully they listen to the amount of people complaining about the lack of chain attack theme toggle in 3 because, We're Fliegen toggle for overdrive, Don't Worry toggle for Skell flight. Honestly, I'm okay with there being a flight theme, even if there's no way to toggle it off, as long as it doesn't play immediately the instant you get off the ground. Let it fade in after a few seconds or after reaching a certain height, especially because you can't just normally jump once you get the flight module. If you forgot that this whole diversion happened in the middle of a trailer analysis, like, comment, and subscribe. The next shot is in the cutscene of a quest leading into a battle. We're in Primordia and we're fighting a bird, which means this is the Broom Aravis, the boss of Arena's first Affinity mission. Sure enough, there she is to the left of Elma. We can't see her face, but I'm going to assume it's been touched up just as much as Elma's has. And hey look, yeah, there's Tatsu's head! He's in the game! They actually finally, truly, really brought him back! Are you ready for remastered peak comedy? Because every single Tatsu food joke is returning and going to look better than ever in this game. Next is another boss fight intro. This is a Senicula Inoculum roaring, and we could see Tatsu running away, a certain plant that was reused in Xenoblade 2. This is the Arrow Senicula, the boss of Close Comrades. The only thing worth pointing out is that Doug will run up to join the party basically right after this shot ends, so they deliberately cut this to make sure we didn't see another character. The next two shots are from the opening cutscene showing the destruction of Earth, and they are identical, again barring lighting and colors, to the original game. So in spite of what some people might have been theorizing, they have not changed that. What they have changed, as evident in the next shot, is Lynn's face, quite significantly. I will also take this moment to notice that Tatsu's face is never directly shown anywhere in this trailer, which was probably for the bit, but it's also really funny. And in this frame, you can clearly see how good the texture on his hood is, and how that was clearly touched up a lot more than the biter on his backpack or even the pack itself. Anyway, Lynn looks human now, so that's pretty neat. When the camera cuts again to show her from the other side, we can see that her hairstyle has actually been completely changed. In addition to her bangs being swept a little bit to the left, her entire hairstyle is no longer symmetrical. It's further back on her right, exposing more of her ear than was visible before, and it's a little bit forward compared to the original on the left, largely because her Monado hairpin on that side is no longer there. Her design has actually been changed that significantly that she only has one Monado now. Now, this probably doesn't actually mean anything, but the main character design change in between Xenoblade 1 and its definitive edition was Alvis's key disappearing. There is a song in Xenoblade X called The Key We've Lost. Xenoblade 1 is the game with the Monado, and Lynn lost one of her Monados between Xenoblade X and Xenoblade X DE, while Alvis lost a key between Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 1 DE. So, these characters have both lost something connected to the opposite game that got a definitive edition. Am I memeing on myself? Absolutely. Am I still going to come up with conspiracy theories to this degree once we get more trailers and more ideas of what's going to happen in this game? Also, absolutely. Look forward to it. Anyway, while Elma looks less like a Tanaka character, honestly Lynn kind of looks more like one, and besides the hair, actually closer resembles her original concept art, though they did not give her her bunny pin back, which is very sad. I think it's largely because Elma's face got made a bit more lengthened out and sharper, while Lynn still kind of has the chubby cheeks, which are a hallmark of Tanaka's style, and also makes sense for her to retain because she is a child, but I don't know what this means for the art style. We haven't really seen enough major characters to really tell what they're going for on a grand scale, because right now it just looks like better versions of the original character model are what they're doing, which I couldn't really blame them for just keeping it at that. Also worth mentioning, in these shots, Tatsu's fur looks extremely fuzzy, and yeah, they are remastering the way Nappan fur looked like in the original Xenoblade X, instead of just using the same techniques they used for Xenoblade 3. They're keeping faithful to X instead of taking a shortcut and doing what they could have very easily done. This is obviously somewhat similar to Xenoblade 1 DE, remastering the Xenoblade 1 Nappan instead of using the techniques they used for Xenoblade 2, but 1 Nappan were mostly just flat textures, and comparing X Nappan to 3 Nappan is like two different branches of a talent tree in order to make them look that way, so this is still pretty impressive. Once again, the way the light interacts with Lynn's face and the way her eyes look is extremely good, and I'm extremely excited to see any new ground-up animated cutscenes for this version of the game, because they are going to make full use of these new models. Next are a couple shots of the Skell walking across and planting the probe from Chapter 4. This is the cutscene where you meet Lao. Lao is an important character, but we don't see him here. Next are some Skells flying southwest across Biano Lake in Primordia towards the ocean. It is sunset, it looks gorgeous, the way the light plays off the water is again significantly better than the original game. I'm running out of ways to say how great this is going to look. Next, just a shot of the residential district of New LA. You can see from the NPCs somewhat in the foreground that, first off, their generic animations are exactly the same, so there aren't going to be big bump ups in that department, which why would they do that for NPCs? Even modern games for powerful hardware don't do that. And that just from the look of the one woman, generic NPC faces have not been improved nearly as much as player character faces, which also is identical to what happened with Xenoblade 1. As for characters who were changed, While Rex got it in Future Redeemed, Lau is the one bearing the Giga Chatification baton for this game, because he did not have those cheeks and that jawline in the original. Next up is Armory Alley with 2 generic Blade NPCs. As these are not major characters in the game, you can see their faces are pretty close to their faces in the original. Next is just the number on Blade Tower. Honestly, I think it's really funny that they play this over the line where Lynn says the future is uncertain, but they don't show the number ticking down closer to 0. It's just 60% the entire time. We then get the last shot of Elma and Cross looking over the balcony into NLA, and then the camera zooms out back around the city and cuts to the logo of the game. Cross's posture looks really, really funny here in Definitive Edition. Why is he so hunched over, and why is his jaw sticking that much out? Specifically in this shot, he looks fine proportion-wise in the other one. I went back and checked, and nah, my Cross was doing that exact thing in the original game. It's just a bit more pronounced because the visuals are clearer here, and it's during the day. It's funny. Doesn't really say anything. In this big zoom out shot, again based on faulty footage, it seems like there is more motion blur in Definitive Edition, but 0 pop-in and more details shown in the wide shot compared to the original, which had a lot of pop-in just along the wall on the outside of NLA, and you could not see individual trees in the residential district once it got that far out, but you can in DE, so draw distance is improved, just not in a super obvious way. You do have to look deep into the trailer to find it, but in the final game, outside of very curated cutscenes, while you're actually just walking around, it's going to be very appreciated for anyone who has played the original. The animation of the logo appearing, while the sound effect is the same, is also significantly more dynamic and cool looking for Definitive Edition. In the original game, it just kind of did a quick zoom out from center on the full logo as one PNG, but for Definitive Edition, the X and the Xenoblade do some clashing things, there's motion lines and all that stuff, then Chronicles and Definitive Edition show up, and you can see bullets go through the letters to make the shrapnel effects, which is really cool, and confirms my theory about what the logo is exactly supposed to look like that I've had for years. Okay then, that's just about a clean 40 minutes. We can talk about spoiler stuff, because after the logo, we get the ending of the game. Spoilers for every Xenoblade. Naturally, of course. This is me, after all. This is brand new footage tacked on to the end of the post-credits scene from the original Xenoblade X. If you don't remember, in the original, after the credits, Elma is examining the Lifehold core. She sees that it's been deactivated for a while now, and yet everyone's somehow still alive, gives her famous something about this planet line, and then it cuts to a figure in black walking along a beach, coming across Lau's shirtless body. It zooms in on his face, his eye opens, and then it does an actual vine boom before cutting to a black screen with the line, "This story never truly ends," on it. While I can't tell you what's up about this planet yet, it does seem like we're at least getting resolution to the Lau cliffhanger in the new story content in Definitive Edition. My interpretation of that scene was always that not only did Lau somehow survive being dissolved as a chimera, but he's back in a flesh and blood human body instead of a mimeosome. And the cloaked guy, who everyone refers to as the Black Knight, has either something to do with that, was expecting this to happen, or will have something to do with whatever the future plotline is. In DE, the scene is tweaked a bit in addition to being extended. Instead of Lau immediately opening his eyes all the way, he half opens them, and then the camera cuts back out to show the figure standing over him. Also, you can tell this is a new piece of animation because his eyes are way more animated. They dart around a bit before actually focusing on the direction the Black Knight is standing. Anyway, the Knight is in a different outfit. In the original game, first off, you could not see the model from this close, so it was hard to make out in general, but they were wearing just a hodgepodge of regular armor you can get in the game, all colored black, while here it seems like they have a brand new bespoke outfit for them, which, that sure looks like an Organization 13 cloak, doesn't it? This has been true for a really long time, probably since the Siren model kit had important lore in it, but the Xeno series has been as convoluted as Kingdom Hearts for a while now. I think we should start accepting that and celebrating it, because that's something a lot of people love about the series, and this guy looking like the guy from Kingdom Hearts should just make us laugh at that and be like, haha, yeah, that is kind of our sister series. Like, almost unironically. Xeno kind of sprung more out of Chrono than Final Fantasy after it stopped being a Final Fantasy VII proposal, and Tetsuya Nomura and Tetsuya Takahashi are, like, actually friends. This is part of the reason why Nomura designed characters for Xenoblade 2 in the first place. Anyway, let's look closely at Lao's eyes here. It is kind of unfortunate they don't open all the way because, well, they look significantly different than they did in the original game. Now, this is almost certainly on purpose. Lao's eyes look artificial in the original game because this is the same model as in the rest of the story, the one where he is a mimeosome. The eyes are supposed to look artificial because they're cameras for a robot and not eyes that work the same way human eyes do. Elma's eyes still have the same very unnatural looking ring of light in the middle of her iris, so it seems like they're keeping the artificial look to the eyes of mimeosomes on purpose, but Lao's here just look like human eyes, not necessarily in the Xenoblade 2 or 3 art style or anything like that. They just look more realistic than how mimeosome eyes are presented elsewhere in the trailer. The only potential hitch in this is that we do not get a close-up of Lao's face in the other shot of him. We'll have to wait more for this to see if they actually did change his eyes, or if his new model just has significantly different looking eyes to begin with. More importantly though, a voice line not present in the original game at all plays, "Fancy seeing you here." And the Black Knight moves his hands up, starts to take his hood off, and then cut to black and the release date. The most important thing here is the voice actor. People were saying the English line sounded very similar to David Mencken, Malos's VA. And while this is certainly within his range and has very similar inflections to some of Malos's lines, the Japanese VA is someone completely new to the series, so this most likely is as well. Granted, it is possible that there are going to be some UK-based VAs recording lines for this if they are new protagonist voice lines that are characters from later Xenoblade games, but if a brand new character for the main story is being included, they're almost certainly going to be voiced by a US voice actor in the dub because the studio that recorded all the important characters from the base game is based out of the US. If any of those characters return, it's probably going to be the same studio using the same actors, so any new actors would make way more sense to come from there. Next, I think we should address what the new story content is actually being referred to as. In the official North American page for the game, it says, "The visually enhanced edition of this open-world RPG contains newly added story elements and more." In contrast, Xenoblade 1 DE does not refer to Future Connected at all, and on Nintendo UK's sites for the games, which are always more impressive and more detailed than the North American ones, there is a small section just talking about Future Connected, referring to it as a newly included story chapter, while the Xenoblade XDE one says, "The visually enhanced version of the epic sci-fi RPG features additional content including new story elements." So it looks like there is going to be new gameplay content in addition to the story, though obviously it could be something as bare bones as Xenoblade 1 DE's Land of Challenge. The problem here is, of course, none of the ways it's worded implies in any direction what this new content could be. Is it a separate campaign like Future Connected was, or is it just pure additional main story content on top of the 12 chapters of the base game? I think it's the latter for a couple reasons. As discussed before, Xenoblade 1's story was complete. It was the story they wanted to tell once they decided on that path, while X's needed to be changed significantly throughout development and had massive amounts of it cut out. On top of that, Xenoblade 1 does the classic JRPG thing. When you beat the final boss and get the credits, you can save a completed file for use with New Game Plus, but if you reload your original file, it's just your last save before you did the final boss fight. While there is so-called post-game content in that game, it's really just enemies that are such higher level than the final bosses that if you leveled up to be able to take on those challenges, you would be so overpowered for the final fight, it's best to do them after you beat the game. Xenoblade X, on the other hand, just keeps going after you beat the final boss. There is no New Game Plus. You get put back in the overworld in a state as after the boss fight occurred. There's new character dialogue discussing all that stuff. There are new side quests that unlock after doing that. There is a proper post-game after the main story, which means there's already the framework established for them to just straight up add more main story on top of that. X's level cap is also only 60, a far cry from the 99 of every other game in the series, and the super bosses are just enemies that are in between level 60 and 99. And while, like every other game, there are super bosses, enemies that are above your level cap, they are all still limited by the 99 level cap. The most powerful super bosses are 98 and 99, where the point of super bosses in the other Xenoblade games is that they break limits in more ways than one, not only by being above your level cap, but also having a triple-digit level, which you could not do. There's also the fact that I keep referring to Xenoblade X as a mostly single-player MMO, and something MMOs love to do is give you a substantial level cap in the base game, and then raise it by a few levels each expansion. In fact, the example of an MMO in this day and age is probably still World of Warcraft. Base game WoW launched with a level cap of 60, and then the first expansion raised that to 70. This is a very good chance for what the Xenoblade X additional content is going to be. An amount of new content equivalent to one MMO expansion. So there are probably going to be a few new story quests, a bunch of new side quests, maybe a new party member or two just because of how X's party system works, and some new enemies to fight. You're probably going to get a new tier of Skell frame as well to go on top of everything. Hey, even the most powerful Skell in the game, the Ares 90, is still 90. That's the equivalent of level 90. What about the Ares 99? The actual equivalent to capping your level in another Xenoblade game. Kinda makes sense. And then there would also be new endgame content after the story, a few post-game quests, and then new raids, which would mean new, harder tyrant fights, and probably even more difficult online missions. It all just kinda makes sense. There's also the fact that, while there are several required Affinity missions that do have them, the main story-only cutscene length of X is roughly 8 hours, as compared to Xenoblade 1's 10 and change, and 2 and 3 hitting closer to 14. So if they want to add more story, then maybe adding a few hours onto the end of X to not necessarily catch up to 2 and 3, but at least surpass 1 in cutscene length, would also kind of make sense. They don't really need that much more story to resolve all the major plot points. The Secret of Mira, Lao coming back, the Black Knight, probably some explanation for the Clurians, because they seem important, and then setting up any actual proper sequels. The Black Knight and Lao are clearly being resolved here, and at least one of the other things can be combined into the teasing for a future entry and made part of a post-credit scene. Like, yeah, it was a pure cliffhanger in the original X, but if they're making this definitive edition with new content, X is probably going to be a fundamental part of the future of the series that they keep talking about, so we know as a fact there's going to be more content, so adding a teaser scene, even if it's not a pure plot cliffhanger, is much more okay in this context. The other thing is, if and how they are going to connect it to the rest of the series. Yes, this is not the Xenosaga remaster tying it into mainline Xenoblade that I thought this was going to be, but that doesn't mean that this is not going to contain connections to other Xeno games. There were obviously the Tatsu references to Xenoblade 1 in the original game, and if there's more Tatsu dialogue, maybe he'll also reference 2 or 3 or something like that. But yeah, there's the Future Redeemed teaser, and there's also Klaus talking about the multiverse in Xenoblade 2. As far back as 2020, Takahashi has stated that all of the Xenoblade games are connected in the same space-time. And honestly, since I first heard the phrase countless universes exist side by side, I was always under the impression that even if they had no reason or legal opportunity to show it, it was always the writer's intention for Xenogears, Xenosaga, and all of the Xenoblade games to take place in the same multiverse, the same one accessible by the conduit in Xenoblade 2. Future Connected even potentially extended this, as it showed Telethia going into a Fog King rift, and we knew the Fog King came from outside the universe of Xenoblade 1. We know now it was set up for Xenoblade 3 and the worlds combining, but that is still Telethia going to another universe, which means that maybe Telethia the Endbringer did actually come from the Xenoblade 1 world initially. My saying that Xenoblade X isn't canon was always saying that it's not in the same universe as the numbered games. It always has been connected, and I always have known that. Even ignoring any potential Xenosaga connections, Mira cannot be the planet formed at the end of Future Redeemed, And while the planet is a reformed Earth, the light coming down cannot be Elma either. None of those make sense. My personal theory, again prior to all the Xenosaga references, was that the Samarians, the ancestors of humanity and creators of the Zarubagans, who are known to look like humans, came from Klaus's world, and now that we know that that world had its own Project Exodus with tons of ships leaving Earth, some of those ships could probably be the Samarian fleet. There's also the fact that Mira seems to exist in some sort of pocket dimension outside the universe based on how it's reached by a random flash of light from people traveling in space and not by physically going there, as it doesn't exist on any sort of maps of the universe. And it also has similar properties to Ionios from Xenoblade 3, leading me to believe that it might be some sort of Endless Now formed from many planets from throughout the same universe, as opposed to refugees from what's effectively the same planet on multiple universes. All that goes to say, at the end of their story, all of the X characters are trapped in something similar to either Ionios or the Xenoblade 1 world, and the Conduit is able to cross universes, so there is possibility for them to cross over with other characters or escape Mira into a world of another Xenoblade game. They can tie it in without Mira being put in the main universe, no problem. And Elma is still in Definitive Edition, which leads me to believe they are not putting it into the main universe, because removing her from the game is the scale of changes that would need to be made to X's narrative to make it line up with the rest of the series, especially if you want to include Xenosaga. Speaking of Elma, by the way, based on her age and backstory, she likely arrived on Earth with the message about the upcoming war in 2025 canonically. So that means the complete version of Xenoblade X is releasing the same year the plot of Xenoblade X was first kicked in motion, which is also pretty cool. Circling back around to what I was trying to talk about, we have the identity of the Black Knight. A lot of them are plausible. Knowing which one they go with will allow us to very easily determine exactly what this new story is going to be and what the next game with X-related content is going to focus on, but we can't see anything about this character, so we can only speculate. The first, and what I think is still the most likely possibility, is that the Black Knight is the hero, Elma's initial partner who perished in the battle over Mira. This is a character that is only referenced a few times in the final version of Xenoblade X, but based on concept art, appears to have initially been the protagonist of the game before the idea to instead include a custom character was introduced. The main reason for this is that it does keep everything contained within Xenoblade X. Now, they could easily tease connections later on, but if the main plot is just an extension of Xenoblade X, that would make more sense, especially if this expanded story is tacked onto the end of the main story and not a separate campaign. There's also, of course, the fact that this character knows who Lao is. Seeing as how the only family members we know about him having were a wife and daughter, the only characters we know for sure to know Lao are all members of Blade and NPCs from the base game, and the hero guy was almost certainly a Blade member if he was working alongside Elma, so he probably would have known Lao back on Earth. A lot of characters like Doug consider Lao to not have died in their post-main story dialogue, so him meeting another character who died but some people think didn't die in some sort of Mirren afterlife and working their way back to NLA, helping the rest reveal the secrets of the planet, makes a whole lot of sense. Even if this isn't an entire brand new separate campaign, maybe there would be segments where you're playing as just Lao and the Black Knight, if this is true. Do remember, despite Lao's antagonistic actions, the way he's portrayed at the end of the story is as someone who everyone expects is going to be redeemed. And if the Black Knight is some sort of antagonist, then it wouldn't really make sense for him to join up with him, but if he comes back to life, meets a villain, tries to fight against him and then just immediately gets killed again, there'd be no point in Lao surviving, so I think there is a very, very good chance that the Black Knight is not some sort of new antagonist, but at the very least a neutral ally character. There is also the fact that this new outfit makes him look significantly more like one of the Testaments from Xenosaga. If you don't know, those are the guys the Mobius and Xenoblade 3 are based on. The fact that this guy existed, people had already theorized he was the hero, and even in his original design looked a lot like one of the Testaments, is another reason why I think Ionios and Mira are connected somehow, and if the Black Knight is this world's equivalent of Mobius, then he is likely another resurrected dead character, which is a good reason for him to seek out the revived Lao. Another very funny possibility is that this is just Malos. The original Black Knight design did have a purple core on the chest of the armor, the same place a core crystal would be. That is, it is Logos purple. Like, I'm not the only one seeing this. Also, the acronym for Blade in the Japanese version of the game is Beyond the Logos Artificial Destiny Emancipator, and this was changed for the localization. There's a very good chance they're going to need to unchange this in this version of X, because there's a good chance it's going to become important. Because we know Logos is not dead, at least not permanently. In the Xenoblade 3 art book, Takahashi revealed that what's inside the Sword of the End and holds, that would be Logos. I mean, it's Malos, but Malos for the time being is dead or has disappeared. So he was never dead permanently, apparently. He showed back up, presumably in core crystal form, to help N out in Xenoblade 3. Then what happened after that? Well, okay, this is probably not Malos's VA in English, and it definitely isn't in Japanese, but we're coming off of Future Redeemed. We've already seen a version of Alvis with a completely different design and voice actor. This is within the power set of the Aegis's to do. I also said that the Black Knight's inflection is very similar to Malos's in English, and another way to read his fancy meeting you here line is as sarcastic. He doesn't actually know Lao, but is saying something funny because that's in his personality to do. You could combine these. Maybe the hero is a reincarnated Malos in another universe that happened after Xenoblade 3 in a cross-universal timescale thing. Like, after he departed from Ionios when N was destroyed, he traversed space-time and ended up being born as a human on Earth in the Xenoblade X world, and when the universes combine, that's how he's going to end up back in the main universe, and will link back up with A and Pyra and Mithra to reform the Trinity processor and stop the Xenosaga-related threats that are coming in, or something like that. There is also the other half of Galea. If Klaus got split between the Xenoblade 2 world and the Xenoblade 1 world, part of Galea ended up in Maineth in Xenoblade 1, but where'd the other part go? Maybe she didn't get ripped in half and the entirety of her was in Xenoblade 1, but how did she lose to Zanza if that's the case? I find it hard to believe a deified version of an entire person would lose to the deified version of half a person, as opposed to the deadlock they were in for most of the history of that world. Where'd the other half of Galea go? Obviously, Zanza and the Architects look physically the same, and it seems like this character is not the same gender as Galea, but who knows if that's constant across universes. Is the Black Knight actually one of the Testaments from Xenosaga? No. All of those characters have voice actors that are both still active in English and Japanese, and it is none of those 8 people in either language, so this is a brand new one. I mean, the Black Testament's English VA is already in Xenoblade X, but that's HB, and the Reds is an option for the player character. Yeah, Yuri Lowenthal is the Red Testament in Xenosaga 3. I didn't realize that until I was checking for this. Speaking of protagonist voices, by the way, there are 10 voice options per gender in the Japanese version, but only 7 in English. This would be a great time to add those additional 3 options, on top of potentially new cameos from other Xenoblade games in both languages. But the only problem with that is they'd also need to record new dialogue of those voice options doing special conversations with certain party members, because that is a thing. When choosing a voice for your cross, you're not just choosing the person voicing them, you're also choosing the general personality. Some of those voice options have unique interactions with party members that others don't, and they don't have the party member side of the interactions for any new options, so I don't really know what they would do there if they did want to add more voices, even in Japanese, because I doubt that they'd be able to get the VAs for every party member back for this, especially because it's very likely that most of them are not going to be involved at all in the new story. Back to the Black Knight, I understand why you might be wary at suggesting that his identity might be a character that did not exist until after Xenoblade X came out, like a form of Malos. And that's because he existed in the original game and was clearly planned to have a larger role in the original game. Plus, there was always the very good theory that he was the unknown hero that entire time. The thing about that is, plans can change. They retconned a lot of Xenoblade 1 to get it to fit better with 2, And considering they need to do a lot more retconning to get either Saga or X to fit alongside the mainline universe, and I'm pretty sure they're doing at least one of those, it's possible for this to change. There's also the fact that this cliffhanger was not followed up on for an entire decade, and maybe the writers thought of something better than they were originally planning in the meantime, or the way that they're now allowed to develop and grow the series led to something making more sense or being more interesting for the identity of this character. Also, hey, we know they had the idea for 3 while working on 2. We don't know how much of 2 they had done when X was done, so who knows what 500 IQ future planning actually did still make it into Xenoblade X in 2015 despite all the plot cuts. Hell, the expanded parts of the story that we learned about in the art book might have never been canon because they existed prior to the final version of the story, and all the extra stuff that's going to be explained is just something completely new that we've never heard about before. Even if this doesn't match up with the story and lore that we thought was going around in the background, then it's not even necessarily something that was retconned. It could have been what the story was always supposed to be, and we only saw a non-final draft to begin with. The thing about this is, when Xenoblade 1 DE was teased, they showed Shulk and Melia on the Bionis shoulder in new outfits with new weapons. This time, we're just seeing a slightly extended version of a cutscene that was already in the original game, and it's extended in a way that doesn't really tell us anything, because it's a very reasonable extrapolation from what was there to begin with. I know a lot of you are probably disappointed with the kind of small amount of things I actually had to say about this story-wise overall, but in order to properly analyze the new story, we need another trailer that actually shows off some of it. Virtually everything in this initial trailer was stuff from the original game, just prettier looking. So I'm gonna need to see some gameplay in order to talk about the gameplay at all, and I'm gonna need to see something more than 5 more seconds to an existing cutscene to properly analyze this new story. Now, while I am warning you to hype responsibly and not expect a lot of new content besides the brand new post-game story stuff, what about other new content that could be added? Well, I touched on it before, but there's either a completely unused arc or something that just was never followed up on about Celica's people, the Clurians, and she does not really do anything in the original X, despite being a required party member who's ostensibly part of the main story. So I think it would be a good idea to add more to her. She does not go to the Lifehold in the original game, despite Elle going, so maybe make her come there and give her at least some throwaway lines in those cutscenes. Also, speaking of Elle, his people, his Devil Trigger design, those are other things that they could follow up on in this if they so choose. There are so many possibilities, and they're probably only going to pick like 2 of them and save the rest for the next game. So I guess that's just 2 more things they could do. Then, how about playable Rothians? He literally is a combatant with a weapon type that already exists for player characters and his own affinity mission, so they probably should add him. Gabuid is also fairly reasonable as someone that could be added. I don't know if they'd put 2 party members in from the same affinity mission or whatever they do there, but hey, that's a possibility too. If anything, give us 6 stars designed skells, because those don't exist. The only skells you can actually pilot in the original game are Earth-made, and it's kind of a waste that you can't, after allying with all of these extraterrestrial races, use mechs they designed as well. Besides Manon and Napon, who probably would not be able to make them in the first place, they're all humanoid enough where something designed for their physiology would probably still be pilotable by a human. And there are also several different ganglion mech styles that could also be used with the rationale that they were captured and reverse engineered or something. Oh, hey, this version is going to have the Japanese DLC characters in the base game, which was true for international versions of the original, but could we get maybe a Yelv and Eleonora follow-up? What's going on with the J-bodies, Monolith? That would be a cool thing to know. The truth of the matter is, there are still a lot of unanswered questions. We're not likely to get them all answered, and there is a chance that they're not going to be answered in a satisfactory way, even if they are touched on in this release. But this greatly increases the odds of another return to Mira in the future. X is the worst selling Xenoblade game, and that was purely because of the system it was released on, Now, it's almost guaranteed to sell well over 1 million, and if they market this properly to Zelda fans, it's going to hit too. If it's improved well and received well both by new players and people who love the original, they're going to see the demand for a full sequel and follow up on that. Nothing out there plays quite like Xenoblade X, so even if they do somehow wrap up all the story perfectly, there is still reason for them to make another one, if that's what they desire. I'm not mad at my prediction being wrong because this doesn't deconfirm Xenosaga by any metric. We don't know the amount of Monolith staff that's even working on this in the first place. They've clearly got enough to make multiple games at the size of production they've been doing for the entire Switch era at the same time. So they're almost certainly at least on pre-production for another project. Plus, that's the Bandai Namco IP, they'd probably be getting support for Bandai Namco on that. They don't need to be working on them at the same time, they could be making XDE, then Xenoblade 4, and then Xenosaga. I just want Xenosaga to become accessible before they follow up on the saga references in Future Redeemed. I don't really care when, as long as it's before it becomes relevant again. And hey, it seems like they're doing that for X, because they referenced X, there was always a good chance that X tied into the main series somehow. This just seems like it's going to be tying it down and making it a bit more concrete, which I'm also happy for. People were denying me saying that was a thing back when I first brought that up, so I don't really lose from this. No one really loses from this. I am glad that the less well-known corners of the Xeno series are being touched on and still loved in the present day because they are all important, and clearly the developers of the series think so, so they should shove it in the faces of fans as best they can, so everyone knows that's true. Just because there's a different gameplay style or a different continuity doesn't mean it's not important, doesn't mean it doesn't matter, and certainly doesn't mean it's not a Xeno game. So what is there to be upset about? I still got one of my favorite games being remastered on a new platform that a lot more people own, with prettier visuals, probably quality of life improvements, and new content. We're getting Xenoblade X Definitive Edition. Why do you think I would be upset with this? This video is roughly double the length of my analysis on the Xenoblade 1 DE reveal trailer, so I think that's a good indication of, first off, how much more of an unconstrained yapper I've gotten since 2019, and hey, this is more tightly edited than that one was too. There were so many weird pauses and ums and ahs that were clearly not cut out from that video when I checked it. But also, how, as much as I love being right, I am completely okay with being wrong, if I'm wrong in this kind of way. Until next time, which will not be a Xenoblade X video because I intend to be making more things before they reveal more information about Xenoblade X DE, and I'm putting all plans for that outside of analysis on hold until this is out and I can learn what the new content is. That was a long way of saying, see you next time. This is Luxon, signing off. Also, how smug do you think they were making their 25th anniversary video that came out like a month ago, including Elma in it, and just using her Xenoblade 2 model, knowing full well an even further updated version was going to be revealed not long after? What is with this master plan? Is there a complete updated Cosmos model somewhere in the archives that they just haven't shown us yet? When will they stop? I mean, hopefully never, but they can't stay this peak forever, right? That seems unfeasible. Are they Mobius now?